Hello there, Mad Mike here. Welcome back to the channel. And today we have the unfortunate news that comedian, producer, writer, director Carl Reiner has passed away at the age of 98, reportedly in his home and due to natural causes. Now, for those people who don't know who Carl Reiner is, maybe for younger people, I could understand maybe not knowing who he is. For people that are kind of 30 and over, you probably do. Carl Reiner was he was a longtime collaborator with a lot of other comedians, but he paved the way basically for modern television sitcoms. He also paved the way for modern comedy, basically, along with a few other people. He was very good friends with Mel Brooks up until his death. Apparently, they ate dinner very often together. Even still, even though they were both in their 90s, and Carl Reiner also partnered up with other people at the time, like Sid Caesar and a few other people back in the 50s, where a lot of those individuals were coming in television. He then went on into the 60s to create stuff like the Dick Van Dyke Show. He was constantly on television. He has a ridiculous amount of acting credits. His acting credits for both film and TV total at something like 200 something acting credits, which is kind of insane. But at the same time, he was also a very accomplished director, and he directed some actually very good films, especially early in his career. He launched Steve Martin's career by directing The Jerk, as well as The Man with Two Brains, which were both very big hits with him. He also directed a couple other films with Martin that weren't as successful. But the thing is, Reiner was somebody who always knew comedy. He was one of those dry wit type of people. He rolled around in kind of the same crew, the George Burnses and stuff like that, where it was that very dry type of humor. Again, I can understand why him and Mel Brooks got along so well, because Mel Brooks is kind of I think Mel Brooks is maybe a little bit goofier than Reiner is. Reiner is a lot more grounded, I think, in the way that he views certain things, even though some of the stuff that he's put out is extremely hilarious. I think Mel Brooks takes it to a bit of a more less real but more comedic level. But both of them are equally as good, I think, if you take their best works and compare them to one another. Where Reiner is really one of those people that, in addition to stuff with the Dick Van Dyke Show, and moving forward, after the Dick Van Dyke Show was a success, then he kind of went on to other projects. So that was when he started really directing films. Because The Jerk wasn't made until I think the early 1980s. But again, really, he launched Steve Martin's career by doing that movie and then doing subsequent movies with him afterwards. And again, I feel like that kind of fits with Reiner's kind of humor. I think it works very well having Martin in the role, because Steve Martin plays that very deadpan type of comedy very well, where he's acting goofy, but at the same time, he doesn't make it seem like he's intentionally trying to act goofy in a lot of scenarios. So I kind of like that about that. I like the directing in The Jerk as well, with the way that Carl Reiner kind of frames a lot of those scenes. I love the scene when Steve Martin doesn't realize it, and he sleeps with the carny in her little tent there. That's one of the funniest ones, because you're looking at it from like the side, like through a bunk or something. It's very weird and intimate, but it feels like you're kind of stuck in the side of the room watching this happen. I really do like that scene, and I think that I credit that to him, because that's really, I think, more the director than anything else getting that type of scene right. But that's the thing, is Reiner knew comedy. He knew comedy inside and out. He could make you laugh doing anything. And he was kind of an everyman when it came to entertainment, because, like I said, he started out really more or less as a writer. He wrote, that's where he met Mel Brooks, was basically in writing rooms for various comedy series that were going on in the 1950s. I believe he worked on the Sid Caesar Show a little bit. I know Mel Brooks did. But I think that they were definitely within the same circles as writers, which is how they became friends. And then afterwards, they moved on and became directors and producers and everything like that. But really, the first part is the writing, and that's what Carl Reiner kind of did in spades. Even up until recently, he wrote an episode of the Cleveland Show in 2017, which I thought was kind of surprising. I wasn't aware that he was still active in terms of that part of his career. I thought he had stopped writing many years ago. But that's the other thing too, is that when you're doing comedy is not I don't want to say it's less creative because it's not, but when you're doing something that's a comedy, really your main goal is to make people laugh. Everything else is secondary. So, you can do a lot of things with comedy that you can't do with other types of mediums, and he was able to exploit that on every single level. Again, from the writing to the directing to the producing, to the starring. Like I said, he was in movies. Some of his more recent movies that people will probably remember him from is Ocean's 11. I mean, he was a fan favorite character in Ocean's 11, 12, and 13. I believe he appeared in all three. Um, and again, he delivers that very dry, deadpan type of humor in all three of those films, which I find hilarious. But the thing with Carl Reiner is that I feel like it's one of those things where he's left his mark on the industry already. He had his entire arc, and he did all of the good and the progression that he did over the years to help comedy become what it would eventually become, along with Mel Brooks and Dick Van Dyke and other comedians at the time. And then on top of that, his son, who he also helped break into the entertainment industry, Rob Reiner has become almost as, I wouldn't say necessarily as successful, but pretty close. I mean, he's directed a lot of really good movies. Actually, probably I would consider more movies that I like even more than his father. Stuff like Princess Bride, Misery, Few Good Men. Stuff. And the other thing, he is branched out of comedy as well. He's branched into horror and into drama. So but I credit that a bit with Carl Reiner because even Rob Reiner said in the tweet where he announced that his father had passed away that he was his guiding light. He was somebody that he followed. He idolized his father. So I think that you have to attribute some of Rob Reiner's success to Carl Reiner and the way that he was able to guide his son into the industry and help him to be successful. But I think that's the other thing too, is that Carl Reiner, it seems like he was there's a small group of people, and I know people have over the years have come out and bashed certain members of this group, but a lot of those older comedians that were doing television and films in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the older guys, I mean, again, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Dick Van Dyke, they all seem like they were very nice family men, and they just like to make people laugh. And whenever you hear stories about them, it's almost always good. Very rarely do you hear bad stories about any of those individuals, and a lot of the time it's just stuff to put a smile on your face. And that's why it's sad almost, because it feels like Carl Reiner is kind of that grandpa that could make you laugh. And it's kind of odd now to think about that in the sense that you've been laughing. How many Carl Reiner jokes have you laughed at in your life? That's actually a very good question that I don't think a lot of people actually know the answer to. Because again, he did so much writing that you'll never actually probably know unless you go through each individual works and see if you've actually seen them or watched them again and see if you laugh. But I don't want to carry on too long with this one because I feel like it's the only things that I can say is that he was a titan of the industry. He was literally a comic legend. He was. I keep bringing up Mel Brooks in this too, and please God let him keep living. But I bring up Mel Brooks too, but you have other people that would be thrown into that as well. The George Burns, oh God, not Rob Reiner. Why am I thinking of that? Don Rickles. People in that vein, people from that old kind of borderline Hollywood, before Hollywood got very artsy in the late 60s into the 70s. That kind of old, very kind of business. I don't want to say business-like, but the old kind of Hollywood. The kind of Hollywood that treated the art form maybe a little less like art, but at the same time they were still able to make it incredibly entertaining and incredibly heartfelt. And that's the other thing I think that we're going to be missing without Carl Reiner behind a pen, is that as comedies progressed, especially over the years, we've kind of lost that simplicity of that core rule. And like I said, the core rule of comedy, the one rule you have to follow is make people laugh. And that is probably no truer a statement than anything you could watch that Carl Reiner has made. And like I said before, there's really not too much I can add beyond that, other than he'll be missed in terms of his impact on the industry and what he's able to do and just his presence in media as well. And I hope that in the future we have more people that are like him that are able to kind of bring comedy back from maybe a point where it's not as great as it once was. But that's just kind of my thing. And again, it's kind of hard for me to go over everything involving Carl Reiner because he did so many things. I just tried to touch on the big things that I could get my hands on, stuff like The Jerk, or the Dick Van Dyke Show, or his later works with Steve Martin, or his acting in Ocean's 11, or his writing for the Dick Van Dyke Show, the Sid Caesar Show. Like almost any comedy that you can think of has probably had something done by Rob Reiner, not Rob Reiner. Why do I keep saying Rob Reiner? I know that's his son, but Carl Reiner. You're not gonna have that. And the other thing is he's done voice work too. Well, again, along with Mel Brooks, he was in Toy Story 4. He actually played a rhinoceros version of himself, which is kind of amusing. Even though I haven't seen Toy Story 4, but I've seen pictures of the character. But he was still doing work, which is, I mean, it was great for him because I mean, to not be able to do something creative when you're somebody like a Carl Reiner is probably torture. But like I said, there's so much that I could never go over it all. I'd be here for 10 hours if I went over each individual thing that he did that was noteworthy. But in the end, I want to know what you think. Remembering Carl Reiner, what was your favorite thing that he did? Whether it was something that he acted in, something that he wrote, something that something that he directed, or maybe even something that he executive produced. Any of those things. Put any of them in the comments below, whatever you feel like putting. As usual, hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?